What's up, guys? It's Rowan
and Terry
from Artist Smart TV, bringing you another episode of the HSC Economics Review. Now, it's been a long time since we've been here. Feels good to be back. We've had loads of requests that have been coming in from students saying, when are you guys doing another video? So we have it, we're back, and we've got a big one today because it is our annual HSC Economics exam prediction video. So what we're going to be doing in today's video is Terry and I are going to be unpacking what our predictions are for the upcoming 2022 HSC Economics exam paper. Now, before we dive in, I just want to share a little bit of the track record that we have. Hopefully, we're going to be able to continue this track record this year. But last year, 2021, we successfully predicted 2 out of the 4 essays and 3 out of the 4 short answer question topics. Now, the 4th short answer question topic, we actually picked as an essay. So what that meant is, across the entire exam, we got 5 out of the 8 topics successfully predicted, which is pretty awesome. Now, 2020 was pretty similar, 1 out of 4 essays, 2 out of 4 shorts. 2019 was 2 out of 4 essays, 2 out of 4 short answers. 2018, 2 out of 4, 5 out of 8 topics. So pretty consistently, we have a pretty good track record of getting 2 out of 4 essays, and at least 2 out of 4 short answer questions. Often we go to the 3 out of 4. So hopefully we can do it again today, and hopefully this will help prioritize your study. Now, I should say, before we dive in, a little bit of a disclaimer here, okay, is that at the end of the day, we're just 2 guys making some predictions about some questions that we think are likely, okay? Now, our hope is that it might definitely help you prioritize your study, but at the end of the day, you should be making your own judgments and doing your own preparation across the entirety of the course to make sure that you are well prepared for your HSC exam.
Yeah, you know what this really reminds me of is, when people make videos about giving financial advice and they're like, disclaimer, this is not financial advice. But I really want to echo what Rowan is saying. Absolutely, you still need to put in the effort. Please don't use this as an opportunity to just go, I'm only going to look at certain parts of the syllabus because these 2 guys on YouTube said, that's going to be the case. But obviously, having said that though, I think what we're going to also do today is we're going to actually discuss our predictions, but we're also going to give our reasoning behind it and the rationale, so that we aren't really just 2 guys. Let's give ourselves some credit here. We are 2 guys who've looked at it. We've spent some time digging, actually.
That's right, definitely. Now, before we also start diving in, and we'll do short answers first, and then we'll go into essays, I'm going to give a huge shout out to Anish from our team. Anish is one of our senior teachers. He leads our economics classes for Year 12 at Artist Smart, and he's also contributed in a massive way to today. Unfortunately, we wanted to bring him on a camera as well because of time constraints in getting this video out in time for the HSC exams. It's just going to be me and Terry. But I just want to say a big shout out to Anish, who has done a huge amount of work in the research as well to support some of the predictions we're going to share with you today. So, Terry, let's dive straight in. I know everyone watching wants to hear what these predictions are. Let's start with the shorts.
Do you want to go first? Maybe go first?
Maybe you want to go with one first, and then we'll go for it.
Alright, so general overview, the way I like to do shorts is I love to have representation. So I love to see, topic 1, 2, 3, and 4 all represented. Now, that isn't always the case. There are certain years where they do deviate a little bit from that, probably with a bias towards topic 3 or 4.
Yeah.
But you know what? I'm just going to stick to my guns.
And I think that's useful because, the approach that Anish and I took when we were working together on it is we went back and we actually looked at about the last 10 years of shorts, right? To look at what is the distribution of topics. And I think pretty much maybe 3 out of the 7 years, it didn't have all 4 topics covered, right? So what that means is that, yes, right, overwhelmingly they are trying to get 4 topic coverage in the shorts. So it makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So I'm just going to keep things really, really nice and simple. For the first one, I'm just going to go with, and what I love about this is it's going to be topic 1, is they often are very liberal in this topic in combining a whole bunch of different things. Yeah, they're not looking, for a major thematic way of what's the word, structuring it. It's usually just you can put anything you really want. So I'm just going to go for something along the lines of international organizations, economic forums, and then just something a bit more general on globalisation. If I can give my rationale for this, it's because between 2017 and 2021, so the past 5 HSCs that have been done, they've always started off with something from topic 1. So I noticed, Rowan, earlier you said 3 out of the 7, they didn't actually go across all of the topics, but in recent times they actually have. So I'm going to stick to my guns for this one.
Cool. And so it's interesting because Anish and I, when we were sort of working on this, we thought that topic's going to be in the exam as well. Just maybe not in short.
Yeah.
So that's maybe the disagreement that we have.
We're going to be disagreeing a lot.
And that's because our sense was that it's likely to maybe come up as an essay rather than a short. And so maybe I'll just share some of the rationale that we have for why we think it's maybe more likely an essay than a short. And I think one of the things here is that, and I think it goes both ways, right? I think the key is that it hasn't really been examined since 2015, right?
As an essay?
Yes, as an essay, right? So it's just been under-tested as an essay. Yeah. If you look at a lot of the topic 1 focuses that have been, this is one of the gaps that just hasn't been covered. And it's also one where there's been a number of interesting things that have been happening in the last couple of years from an international org's point of view. So if you think about it, pre-COVID, the reason this hadn't been examined was because in many respects there was an argument that it was the death of the international organisation, right? Not really, but its relevance, their ability to have impact was really diminishing. And so often when you were doing analysis for, the impact and role of international orgs, you were sort of digging in a little bit and saying, well, are they still as relevant as they might have been 20 years ago, right? Whereas COVID has really seen, because of the need for much more of a global, both health and financial response, it's arguable to say that there's been a greater focus on international orgs again.
I want to also add on that, just for our political fans out here, that those were probably just the Donald Trump years, right? And he probably did a lot to try and undermine a lot of those efforts from those international orgs. So without him in the picture at the moment, I think definitely there is a case for that as an essay.
And so I think what it highlights is it's probably a topic that, I guess we both feel is going to appear somewhere in the exam. And I think it's one of those topics that I observe that students often sort of not skip past, but don't give a lot of time to, because it's not that difficult, really, right? It's not conceptually hard. You've just got to remember.
You've got to memorize a lot of stuff, really.
And so it's easy to just be whatever, right? Move past it. So look, our suggestion is maybe you should take a little bit of another look at it.
Yeah. Whether it's a short or an essay, really.
That's right.
We think it's going to be there. And just one more point about that, just in terms of exam design, now that I've worked in the industry a couple of years, I've had a couple of opportunities to write my own exams and things like that. Most teachers, or I'm assuming, I don't know anything about the committee who wrote this HSC paper, but most of the time they would probably want to start with the essays first. Right, and so that's why for me, this is why I think it's a short, is that they definitely wanted to include it, but they probably, in my opinion, had more pressing things they wanted to talk about in the essay. So just explaining my point of view,
Cool.
But I definitely think it will be there.
Awesome. So then I'll leave with another short that I think, and I don't know, I don't think you have this one as one of yours. So, protection and free trade was a topic that Anish and I thought as a short. Now, the reason we thought that was when we looked at, again, the sort of analysis of prior papers from 2016 onwards, there's usually been at least one question on protection free trade as a topic, right, in the paper. That could be an essay or a short. Okay, so in other words, it's almost like the environment, one of those topics that is featuring almost every year, right? Now, we believe that the trend is going to continue. It was also in both the independent and Catholic papers this year. So, they perhaps have a similar sense that maybe, right, it's going to be sort of in the paper. Now, additionally, we think it's unlikely to be an essay, because it was an essay in 2021. Now, again, it's not to say that they sometimes don't repeat similar topics because of just the importance of them and the opportunities that that are going on in the global economy for students to showcase knowledge. But we think, given it was an essay 2021, more likely to be a short in the 2022 paper.
Yeah, I definitely agree that I don't really see it being as part of the essay, because I think when it was an essay in 2021, from my understanding, it was done fairly well across the state. And usually when a topic's done well, there isn't really an incentive to really go back and test it again in that same section. So I think if they do want to feature it again as to continue that trend of having it present, I think it definitely belongs in the short answer. So funnily enough, it was one of my possibles. So like we've done our 4 proper predictions, then we've done like a possible, and free transportation was a possible for me. So I definitely agree with everything you said there. I guess I just ended up choosing international orgs instead. Yeah.
Awesome. And so then I think we have maybe an agreement on the next 2 for the shorts. So do you want to hit one of them?
Yeah, so we'll start with the labour market first. Yeah, I definitely agree. This one is, I think it's overall very undertested, and it's definitely, if there's a year for it to kind of reappear, come back out, I think it's definitely this one, just because, and I think Rowan, you expand on this a little bit more. There was just a lot of like issues with industrial action, and there was negotiations, and I think that it's definitely been talked about more than the average economic year that we've had. It's also just, like I said, it was only an essay in 2017 and 2014, and Rowan actually predicted it last year, although it didn't.
I know, I've been like, it's got to be here, it's undertested, it hasn't really been looked at for so long. So look, yeah, I agree, it was a little bit partially examined in the 2019 essay, but it was only like really partial, right, very small. As Terry said, 2017, it also appeared. I think, yes, this year's had a lot of labour market discussion. Right, from a lot of media coverage on rail strikes, teacher strikes, nursing strikes, and I think one of the reasons why it might not have been appearing as frequently is that there hadn't been a lot happening in labour market reform. So since really Fair Work, where we're sort of talking about like 2009 into 2011 in terms of some of the changes that were sort of born from that. It had been a fairly stagnant area of policy. So that's started to change. And so that makes me think that, okay, look, potentially, yes. It's been undertested. There's an opportunity here. I think the other thing is that it hasn't been the focus of a short answer question since 2011. So as a short answer, this thing is like crazy undertested. It also did appear in the Catholic paper. Now, I think with labour market, it's likely that they might connect it to one of the topic 3 economic issues, right? Yeah. Again, they've been tending to, the trend in the short answer questions over the last couple of years have been really to try to like connect a couple of topics that are related, often in a question. So I think it may be labour market and unemployment, but obviously labour market will also touch upon particularly inflation with wage growth, as well as distribution of income and wealth. So there's a couple of different places they could take it, actually.
Absolutely.
Awesome. And then I think the second one we agreed on, and then we have like one that we don't, is distribution of income and wealth.
Yeah. So I'll lead off with why, because I tend to think of this as a bit of a curse sometimes. So I'll tell you what the curse is. I like to call it the Catholic independent curse. If something features in both of them, I often feel like that means it won't be. I think it's a little, because they kind of know, it's a bit too obvious. It's a bit, but you know what? I'm going to ignore the curse this time. I think distribution of income and wealth definitely has a role to play. And what I found really interesting was that in last year, it was one of the objectives that the essay questions could touch on. So you basically, and both of those essays were section 3, which meant that you absolutely had to talk about it no matter which one you did. So I definitely feel like they have wanted to test it recently, and also from my understanding it wasn't done particularly well last year either. So because you remember last year was like 3 different objectives you had to match it with, so the other objectives tended to be done a little bit better, like economic growth and unemployment, but distribution of income and wealth was definitely not done well.
And my sense is just in supporting students through the economics course, it's another area of the course where I find students sort of skip over. Because again, it's not like conceptually hard to understand, and maybe short of, I understand the Gini coefficient, okay, great. Like when you're actually getting into, maybe some of the causes, some of the differences, in income distribution across groups within the economy, that's often the place where I feel like students sort of skip over it a bit, right? Yeah. And that's also, I think, where a short potentially has some opportunity, right, to really dig into.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I also feel like, really another thing that gets kids, students, is that they don't separate income and wealth, right?
Yeah.
And so I feel like, there's so many little avenues for them just to play around with.
There's different coefficients for income and wealth, right? There's very different outcomes.
So if this is the first time you're hearing this, you might want to open that textbook again, have another read.
Awesome. Now, I think the other thing I would say here to add to this is, yes, obviously to reiterate, it appeared in both the Catholic and the Independent papers, but I think it's featured since 2017, but mainly in the essays. So again, it's this thing where it's a bit under-tested in short answer. It's also a good topic to sort of showcase it and test through the short answer, because you can do a bunch of different things with it.
So many different things. There's literacy
there's the
stuff,
calc
numeracy.
stuff. Exactly, right? So it's also a question that lends itself quite well. And again, it's been highly topical over the last 2 years.
So sorry to bring some boring teacher stuff into it, but when you're writing an exam as well, you actually look at the different outcomes that you're assessing. And definitely, I feel like in a lot of these short answers that we've been looking at, they're quite written based. So there definitely is space for something graphical, something numerical. So
and you'll see that across the short answer. There's usually at least one component of that, right? So it's one of the things definitely to sort of keep in mind. The next one, I think we had a little bit of disagreement on, but I think there's potentially some commonality around the final. I have it as a possible, and you have it as a core, right? So the one that Anish and I thought might be is exchange rates. Now, the reason we thought of exchange rates, couple of reasons. I guess one, trying to get the topic coverage, topics 1, 2, 3, 4 in the short answer questions. So we needed a topic 2. Secondly, there's been a lot of movement in the exchange rates globally over the last 2 years really, but particularly the last 12 months. So it's a topical issue. Third, it lends itself well to graphing, calculation, numeracy-based questions. So it sort of fits nicely as a question opportunity. Third, though, which maybe is the thing why it isn't, is it was a short answer question in 2021. So there are some pros for it, but there are also some things that indicate, particularly in the last year's paper, that maybe suggest, is it going to be back so soon? Right, now in saying that, it is a fairly common area, and it did appear in 2019 as a short and 2018 as a short. So there is like a precedent essentially for it appearing multiple years as a question. But again, we'll have to wait and see. So Terry, what did you have as your alternative?
Well, first of all, I just want to say I totally agree with you for exchange rates. I agree so much with you that I think it's an essay. I think there's just so much to talk about, and so especially when you get to stuff about actual global movements and trends, if I was an examiner, I'd want to probably see that play out in an essay more, because I think in short answers you're a bit limited in how much actual global, but how many actual global events you really can talk about. So what I have as an alternative though for the shorts is I've got just BOPs and external stability, which is I'll be honest, very boring, very safe, just very generic kind of pick. My reasons though is, and again I'm ignoring my Catholic independent curse, featured in both of them, and it actually was also, so external stability was actually a part of both essays last year, and I don't think it was also done well. So same thing that I said about distribution of income. I think that if they're going to look at it and go, okay, there's some things that weren't done well last year, let's examine it again, and maybe let's, and if they don't have the space to do that in the essays, they'll probably want to do that in the shorts. So I think they'll revisit it, and again, also just the final point for why I thought BOPs and external stability is topic 2 representation. But like Rowan was saying before, it's like a combination. You're combining elements of topic 3 and 2 together, right? Because you don't just have the BOPs, you've also got other elements of external stability coming in, and I really think that makes a very nice question.
And I think that's where that was the possible that Anish and I had, right? Where so I think there is that interesting agreement. Like Terry, you put it as one of your core, where possible, right? Because we're not sure if it's that or exchange rates, and that was an external stability. BOP related one, maybe with a little bit of policy. And the reason for that is, if you think about external stability, one of the sort of areas of concern has been the growing size of Australia's debt, right? Particularly because interest rates have been rising, and that raises questions about sustainability and external stability. So I agree. I think it could definitely see it appear. Now, I tend to think, I believe so much so in the balance of payments that I think that's going to be an essay, and we'll talk a little bit more
Cool.
about that in a moment.
Yeah.
But I think that there could be an external stability focus, because you're right. I find that students don't do that very well. External stability, I mean, the BOP is one of the hard areas of the course to start with. External stability is then really layering on, an extra level of analysis on top of that, and so it's an area that I can see that they would want to come back to.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
So there we have it. There are our shorts, and we've also sort of been unpacking a little bit, therefore, about where we're going with the essays.
Yeah.
Let's dive in with the essays. Do you want to lead the way
The
with...
moment we've been waiting
Yeah.
for. Because I remember...
Drum roll.
Yeah. We started these as, I think, just essays.
Yeah, and then we've expanded into...
So I'm going to start first. So we'll go to section 3 and then section 4, if that's okay with you, Ron.
Cool.
So I'm actually going to... I'm going to be a bit boring. I'm actually going to stick with what they kind of did last year, and that was policies. But instead of like, and they'll mirror it. So last year was fiscal, and then it was monetary against a bunch of different objectives. I'm going to do it the other way around this time. I'm going to do an objective or a key issue from topic 3, and then the policies used to address that. So I've really got. I think we actually
agree on these.
Yeah. So I'm going to start with inflation and policies. I think this one is probably everyone's pick. Like, if you're going to talk about a fan favorite, this is the one that everyone's expecting to see. And, we know why. So, just to give you a bit of background, it's been such a key issue in recent times, with the cost of living, just rising CPIs. And so, and what's funny is that you actually have to go really, really back, all the way back to 2010. Right, when they first examined it as inflation as its own.
On its own, that's right. Yeah.
So, and also the independent paper. So the independent papers seem to agree with us.
That's right. And I think that's the big thing here is that it hasn't been focused on its own issue for such a long time period. And to be fair, you can sort of understand why. Right, throughout the 2010s,
it was a low.
Inflation wasn't an issue, really, right? We had a low inflationary environment, and you can see why they wouldn't. We've now got inflation as a significant issue. So I think definitely, I do think the expectation here though will be to look at policy response as well to the issue. So it's not just a matter of like understanding, the causes and effects of inflation, although I think certainly having that and revising that's going to be really helpful. I think you're also going to need to have really a macro and a micro, although the micro is going to be particularly, I think, relevant from the supply side issues that have been driving. And look, it's not like there's a lot that Australia can do with some of these from a policy point of view, but I would be looking not at just your macro policy response here. I'd be making sure that you also just are doing a little bit of revision on the role that micro plays in also supporting, I guess, managing inflationary pressures in an economy. Because I think that's an area that students tend to overlook a little bit.
Yeah, so I want to add on to what Rowan was saying in terms of that marriage of the issue and the policies. I love to think of it now, like, let's add more to this, right? So we've got the topic that we're going to talk about, but I reckon we also should start thinking about the verb that can ask you to do. And what's really interesting, I want to point out a couple of things, is that in my opinion, they've become increasingly more evaluative and assessive.
That's right.
I don't know if that's a word. Assessing or assessive? I don't know.
Let's go with it. You know what we mean.
Yeah, so to give you a bit of an idea, last year, 2021 HSC, there was 2 evaluates and 2 assessors. In 2020, 3 assessors, and then to what extent, right? 2019 kind of bucked the trend a little bit. It was 2 discussed and 2 explained. 2018, 3 assessors and 1 evaluate. And then finally 2017, it was 2 analyze, 1 explaining, 1 compare and contrast. But, we look at just those 5 years, right? 3 of those 5 years, you've got basically predominantly assessing questions. And I think, the only good way to do it, if you're going to do a policy, you're going to do an issue, is you're going to ask them to evaluate how well it's achieved.
And so I think from a point of just if you were studying anyway, right? Like, one of the things that I find is that, it's much easier to go backwards from an assess to a discuss if you prep for an assess.
Absolutely.
It's much harder to go the other way, right? Where if you prepped only for a discuss and you've now got to assess, you can be in a world of pain. Great, so we've got agreement. I think we both agree inflation and with a policy focus. I think the other one that we both agreed on with a similar structure was environment and policy. And one of the things that I'll share on environment is that environment basically appears in every paper in some form. Okay, like it is there either in the shorts or the essays. And it almost takes an alternating pattern. What I mean by that is it appears in shorts one year, essays the next. Shorts one year, essays the next. Now in 2021, it appeared as a short answer. So one, if we go with the pattern for a moment, it's plausible that it may appear as an essay this year. I think bigger picture though, really the last 12 to 18 months, the environment has taken a huge focus for the Australian economy and the Australian people, right? Both with significant flood and fire events, as well as, arguably one of the major issues for the election as well. And so my sense is that there was finally some Liberal government policy change in relation to climate change that occurred over this period that was reflected in the budget that was announced earlier in the year. And so I think there is a lot that has been going on here that makes this a really meaty topic to really dig in.
Yeah, so absolutely. I think, again, just going back to what they've been doing recently in terms of the exam, that whole idea of mirroring. So you're going to have inflationary policies, you also want to have environmental policies. Now, I envision this to probably be a case where most people will do inflation.
Yeah.
But I think, honestly, if you know your environmental policies, you know what's been happening, you can write an absolutely brilliant essay. Because I think it's honestly a lot easier to evaluate, the effectiveness and impacts of environmental policies compared to inflation.
Well, particularly because there's a lot of noise with inflation right now.
Exactly,
right? There's a lot of changes in the data. There's a lot of different factors that are arguably driving and contributing to it. So in many respects, writing about inflation right now is the more complex choice.
Yeah, in my opinion, there's really it's not one that you can have a definitive answer. Yeah. And if you don't have a definitive answer, you need to still understand what's been happening, all those confounding factors. And if you don't have that, I don't think you end up building up a very strong essay. This was the case, I know, just from my experience marking essays for the trials at my school, right? A lot of them were, unfortunately, they had an idea, but it wasn't deep. And I think it's actually quite difficult at the moment. So everyone's going to want to do inflation, but I actually think it's quite difficult because, as Rowan said, there's all that noise. Yeah. And even with the data that you get, you don't really get any kind of perfect data that shows,
I mean, it's why the ABS are moving for the first time ever to monthly inflation reporting as opposed to quarterly, right? I mean, that's a good sign that, they're struggling themselves, right, to make sense of the pace of change that's occurring. Yeah. What I would say as well here is that I almost view environment, right, as this almost like this hack to ace the paper. And what I mean by that, I know that's a bit of a call, but I'll back it up, right? I find that most students avoid the environment, right? You do it in topic 3, but to be honest, most of the meat from an environment point of view, you end up really grappling with from a policy point of view in topic 4. Depending on the order in which your school has taught topic 4, if your school has done it in a linear order, now I know a lot of schools mix up the order of the topics, but I would still say the majority of schools take a linear approach, right? Now that means that often environment, labour and micro at the end of the course don't get covered in as much depth.
No.
Right? It's just reality, okay? And so what that means is I find that it's also the topics I observe that students are weaker at. Not because they're not capable, it's just because there's been less time on it, there's been less focus. And so what I mean is if environment appears in every paper, we've seen it appear in every paper, and it's an area that most students don't really have a good command on, even though it's not conceptually hard. It's why if you double down and nail it, right, and then choose that section of the paper, if it's an essay, right, to do it, you've got a really great way to really stand out and nail, at least a part of the paper. So that's what I meant by, I think it's this area where you know it's going to be in the paper almost, nail it, and you're going to have a great opportunity in getting some really great marks for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So then let's move on. We're in agreement on 2,
Section 3,
right?
Yeah.
I think where we lose some agreement is the next part. So I'll go with one of my picks and then you jump in. So Anish and I, we really felt that that there was going to be a balance of payments essay. Now I think this is probably where I think Terry, you felt it would appear more in the short answers, right? Yeah. Where Anish and I felt it would appear more in the essays.
Why do you think I say?
Yeah, the reason I guess is a couple of factors. One is there's been 13 consecutive quarters of a current account surplus, right? Which is pretty remarkable, okay? It's an important trend. And at the moment that there really hasn't been an opportunity for that to be assessed, particularly as an essay, right, in the HSC. So if we look at it, it didn't appear in last year's HSC. and it has not been an explicit part of an essay since 2012. So it's also relatively like undertested as an essay at the moment. It was technically in the 2020 paper, but it was part of the stimulus, right? It wasn't a core part of the question. So our sense is that, like it's undertested, it hasn't been around, there's been a lot going on, and again, this is whether or not you want to believe, the sort of the fact that the Independent and the Catholic paper also were really leaning into it as well. So that's sort of the pick that Anish and I had. We thought, it's meaty, it hasn't been examined for a long time, lots going on. We think it's a good opportunity.
Yeah. I think I have very similar reasons for you, just for a different topic. So for my one is the case study, and I think we've been talking about the case study for a number of years now already. We've been waiting for it to show up because we thought there was a trend, right, Nessa? I thought we had a trend going on, man. So
you let us down, Nessa.
Yeah, you did. So basically, it hasn't featured as the case study hasn't featured an essay since 2017. It was a short answer in 2021. Now, it usually was supposed to appear about every 3 years. So 2014, 2017, supposed to be 2020, didn't happen. 2021, brought it back as a short. You know what, 2022, let's bring it back as an essay. So I reckon it's a bit overdue. Now, another reason I have to support it really is that I think there really is some really interesting points that can be made. And I said this last year. If you go back and watch last year, I said this.
Because I think we both predicted this last year, right? I think we were both like, yes, it's going to be there, and then we got screwed.
Yeah, so because there's just and I think maybe even this year there's even more of a case for this. There's so much more clarity and data, and evaluation that can be done of the policies which different countries did in response to COVID.
Yeah, and so that's exactly it. You've almost got like a refresh, don't you, right? Yeah. Where it was getting a bit stale.
Oh, very stale, absolutely.
Right? Where now you've got this opportunity to look at, how did different countries respond to COVID?
Yeah, and it's so exciting, and you can definitely talk about it. So I also think that, just to go back to, I think, free trade protection, why haven't I included that? It's just because I thought last year it was done relatively well. So I've been talking about this a lot, and it is a thing. If topics aren't done well in a certain HSC, or they're done well, that will factor into the way that the examiners do think about what they include. So I think that's already been done quite well. So I'm happy to give it a bit of a miss. So I thought, what other topic 1 content can I bring in? And I've already got, the international orgs as a short answer. So I thought case study as an essay. Just make it happen. You know what?
And so that's where I thought, and Anish thought, we thought maybe international orgs and trading blocks might come in. But I agree with you. I think, the case study it's overdue. And I think there's a couple of ways they could tackle it, right? Because I've been sort of thinking about this for, how many years? 3 years, right? We've been like, it's coming. One is that they could focus on a particular issue, okay? Or a couple of particular issues. So if you think about it, arguably distribution of income or wealth, during COVID, particularly was exacerbated globally. The environment, right? So there are a couple of ways. It might not be like a traditional, case study in the sense that it's talk about everything. They may actually get you to dive in a little bit, right? So that's one way they could focus it. The other way is that they could also get you to do, and I've seen this in some trial papers, not this year, but in the recent years, do a compare and contrast with Australia. Yeah. Which is challenging.
It is. It's a lot. Yeah.
So I don't know if they'll do that, but that's just what I would say is if you're prepping for a case study, don't just go and think, great, I'll just go do the general stuff, right? Yeah. I would if you really wanted to prep for it, watch for those two things and at least maybe do an essay plan, right? Yeah. Variation for it. So if you do get it and you get a little surprised, you go, great, I got the essay plan that I did. I can rely on that to help me through it.
Yeah, so in terms of the verb, I think definitely, Rowan, you were kind of alluding at it, it's going to probably be quite, at least, analytical, right? They're going to want you to look at relationships and stuff like that. They're probably a bit of a discussion. They might, I actually think if they do case study, they probably might move away from evaluating because, when the generic one is, evaluate the success of policies.
Well, it could be a compare and contrast, right? Depending, right? Yeah. I mean, given that we've seen that come up, in your analysis of the prior, so... Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think they'll ask you necessarily to just evaluate. But going back to just your balanced payments one very quickly, what kind of verb do you think they might kind of roll with there?
Yeah. I mean, look, that's an interesting one. I mean, given that we were talking about with the assess and the increase of assessment. Like, one way that you could take that is that there was for years questions that were getting you to like evaluate the impact of a continuing current account deficit, right, on the Australian economy. Yeah. So one of the ways you could take it, right, is a flip. Which should be challenging, right? Yeah. Now, in saying that, they may dial it back and not go that difficult, right? Because that is a hard question. And look, I have seen that appear as a couple of times as like a short answer question, right? Where they've sort of said, hey, what are the implications of a current account surplus, right? As opposed to, I think ultimately they could go with something a little bit more simple, which is like a cause and effect approach. And that could ultimately then be like a discuss. Right? They could end up going with not the assess, although that question would still lead itself to like an assess or an evaluate, because like, why have we got a current account surplus, right? Like there is still an opportunity there to make an evaluation as to what has occurred. So again, I would prep for the higher order, but I wonder if, for that question, it may not be, because it is a challenging topic, that they may opt for a slightly simpler verb.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really important, that we say that, because if you actually look at last year, they actually, for section 4, they made a big effort to make those questions assess, and it was for free trade and protection, and it was for trade and financial flows. Those aren't traditionally verbs like that you do for those ones. So I definitely think there is a precedent for them to just try and shoehorn those in a little bit. They're forcing it a little bit, But yeah, as Rowan said, prepare for those higher order verbs. But I think, for some of my students, I've actually noticed at school is that they'll prepare for those more difficult verbs, but then it actually makes it difficult if it's not it's not a higher order as well. So you need to also practice going up that higher order, but also
knowing how you could take
scale it back down. Yeah, it's very important.
That's true, because you're right. Because otherwise, then you start running out of the time that you need to.
Yeah, and you're just not answering the question. Like you're evaluating stuff you don't need to be evaluating. So. Anyway.
So then, just as we sort of get close to wrapping up, like I think we both had like a possible outside of this, right? That we thought maybe. And I'll just lead, I just wonder if, given the trend in fiscal and monetary policy appearing in the paper, right? Whether or not, now of course we've already highlighted inflation, there's probably a likelihood of, some sort of fiscal and monetary policy appearing there. But at the moment, the predictions, at least initially I had, were very focused on, there was a lack of fiscal and monetary, right, as a focus. So what I'm suggesting for this as a prediction is more so because I recommend that you should have an essay for this up your sleeve, just in case, is good practice, right? And that is to have an effectiveness of fiscal and monetary policy, right, essay. And that's because it's just one of those topics, one of those essay topics where I think if you have it up your sleeve, it's going to serve you well across the entirety of the paper, right? That's just my gut. So I've got that as just a possible. It's more of like a cover yourself so you get familiar with monetary and fiscal policy more than anything, right? What about you, Terry?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you should probably cover yourself always. Fiscal, monetary, there's always a good chance that they'll be there somewhere. Yeah. And I actually don't have them in my shorts or essays, but they'll probably be in the multis.
And that was my concern as well, right? Like, I didn't really have it in, like, maybe with external stability, but it was like,
Yeah, so I guess we are, in hindsight, we are actually taking some pretty big risks here. We're actually not playing it safe. So my possible, instead of fiscal and monetary, was just going to be micro reform. And I always just think, it's been a little untested historically. Yeah, but it's actually started to ramp up a little bit, because there was a short answer 2021, 2020, 2018, and it was an essay 2015 and 2019. So I think there's definitely a room. Just maybe have also a micro essay up your sleeve, because it also synergizes quite well with what we were saying with inflation, right? Because if you have that ready, you can also just pop some of that into your inflation essay very, very nicely.
Well, the environment as well, from a policy point of view, right? Like, when you unpack environmental policy, it's part of the microeconomic focus of the economics course. So
it's not what most people usually write about first.
No, it's definitely not. But it is technically part of that, right? So I would definitely agree. I think micro, because of what we shared as well, it's one of those topics that often, if it's the last thing you've covered, it tends to be something that's a bit rushed. And to be fair, it's also a topic I observe that it's not as, to be frank, I think students don't find it as, not to say that students find economics exciting or sexy at all. Maybe that's just you and me, Terry. But in particular, I find that students really don't tend to like micro. It's a bit drier, right?
Rowan, I can agree with you. My whole class, if you guys are watching this, right, you guys know how much you hated it.
Yeah. So I think, it's one that's worth, again, like, taking the time to do a bit of revision on it.
Absolutely.
Amazing. So there you have it, guys. There are our predictions for both the shorts and the essays, right? Let us know what you think in the comments, right? Let us know, do you think we've entirely screwed it up? Got something wrong, right? Do you think our shorts or our essays are well off? Or do you think there's something else that we've missed that we and everyone else should consider? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to know.
I'll put it in their language. So, do you guys think that Rowan and Terry fell off? Are we mid now?
Brilliant.
So they'll get Rowan. They'll understand what
Cool,
that means.
because that went over my head.
Yeah. I just have one final thought. I just want to say, I love, I know this one's probably going to be a longer video, but I love that we took some time to actually talk about the verbs, because I think we can talk all day about what topics it is, but also the verb is really going to change and influence just the way that essay plays out, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think you need to also just be mindful of that, right? I'm sure your teachers at school are talking lots and lots about the verbs for all your different subjects, but be mindful of all the different verbs.
And I think it's important because, as a final comment, I think I observe that students tend to glaze over when you start bringing the verbs out, because it's I've already heard it, I've already heard it, whatever, right? And I would say that, honestly, if you're aiming for a Band 6 response, you're listening, and probably if you've got to this part of the video, you probably are. Yeah. Let's be honest, right? You need to master the verbs, right? Yeah. If you do not nail those verbs and understand how to hit them, you are not going to be getting into that Band 6 level response. And so I think if that's your goal, pay attention to the verbs. Brilliant. Awesome, guys. Stay tuned. We have loads more HSC Economics Review episodes coming, just in time for the HSC exams as well, to help you guys get prepped. So stay tuned. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. And all the best for your HSC Economics exam. See ya.
Good luck.